Tonight we pull back the curtain on the lives of the ultra-rich, where fortunes are as fragile as champagne flutes. We take you inside the exclusive St. Regis Legacy Ball, a world of dazzling gowns and billion-dollar handshakes. Here, tech titan Alistair Sterling was king, his pregnant wife Elara the envy of all. But a perfect life built on secrets is a gilded scut waiting to collapse. In a single brutal act witnessed by the city's elite, Alistair shoves his pregnant wife to the floor. What happens when the mask of perfection shatters for the entire world to see? This isn't just a story of a marriage falling apart. This is the story of how one man's monstrous pride led to him losing everything, literally, overnight. The air in the penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park was so sterile it seemed to hum with its own expensive silence. It was a silence curated by Alistair Sterling, a man who had built his empire, Aura Innovations, on the principle of seamless, silent efficiency. His world was one of clean lines, polished chrome, and emotionless transactions. His wife Elara was supposed to be the one soft, beautiful exception. Elara stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in their cavernous walk-in closet, a space larger than the apartment she'd grown up in. The gown laid out on the velvet chaise was a custom Serafina azure, a cascade of midnight blue silk that had been tailored to accommodate the gentle swell of her 5-month pregnancy. It was beautiful. It was also, she thought with a pang of melancholy, just another part of the costume. For 3 years, she had been Mrs. Alistair Sterling. She had played the part of the adoring, elegant wife to the self-made tech billionaire who had rocketed to the top of the Forbes list before his 35th birthday. At first, it had been a whirlwind of passion. Alistair was magnetic, a force of nature who saw the world not as it was, but as a series of problems he could solve with enough capital and ruthless ambition. He'd swept Elara, an art history graduate, with a quiet disposition and a love for dusty libraries, off her feet. He called her his still point in a turning world. Lately, however, she felt less like a still point, and more like a beautifully framed painting he owned, admired when convenient, ignored when not. His temper, once a thrilling spark of his intensity, had sharpened into a weapon of control. His compliments were now directives. "That color looks powerful on you, Elara. Wear it to the fundraiser. Smile more when the photographers are around. It shows a united front." The pregnancy had made it worse. She had hoped it would soften him, bring them closer. Instead, it had become another variable for him to manage. He hired the best obstetricians, a nutritionist, a prenatal yoga instructor, not out of tender concern, but as if he were assembling a team to manage a high-stakes project. The project being, of course, the Sterling heir. "Is the dress acceptable?" Alistair's voice cut through the silence. He stood in the doorway, already in his tuxedo. He wasn't looking at her, but at her reflection, his eyes scanning the fit of the gown with the critical gaze of a quality control inspector. "It's beautiful, Alistair," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "It should be. It cost more than a mid-size sedan." He adjusted his cufflinks, a flash of platinum and onyx. "Remember, tonight is critical. Julian Croft will be there. He's the last holdout on the board of Omnicorp. I need his vote for the acquisition. You need to be charming. Don't talk about your art theories or anything. Esoteric. Talk about the baby. People like that. It makes us seem stable. Human. Julian Croft." The name had been a constant presence in their home for months. Croft was old money, a scion of a real estate dynasty, a man whose wealth was so established it was practically part of New York's geology. Alistair, the brash newcomer, Both despised and desperately craved his approval. To Alistair, acquiring Omnicorp wasn't just a business deal. It was a way of forcing his way into the pantheon of the untouchables, the world where men like Croft resided. "What if I feel tired, Alistair?" Elara asked, one hand instinctively resting on her stomach. "Dr. Evans said I shouldn't overdo it." His eyes finally met hers in the mirror. For a second, the coldness in them was so profound it made her shiver. It was the look of a man assessing a malfunctioning piece of equipment. "Don't be tired, Elara," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Be perfect. That's all I'm asking. I'll handle the rest." He turned and walked away, leaving the scent of his $1,000 cologne and the chill of his command hanging in the air. As she slipped into the dress, the silk felt less like a luxury and more like a shroud. She looked at the woman in the mirror, the diamonds at her throat, the professionally styled hair, the designer gown. She looked like the luckiest woman in the world. But as she placed a hand on the small, firm bump of her belly, a fierce protective instinct flared within her. It was a fire Alistair had never seen, and one she was only just beginning to feel herself. She wasn't just a Sterling accessory anymore. She was a mother, and tonight that would make all the difference. The drive to the St. Regis was a silent, tense affair. Alistair was on his phone, his thumb flying across the screen as he barked orders at his head of M&A. Elara watched the glittering lights of Manhattan slide by, feeling a sense of dread coiling in her stomach. The Legacy Ball was the social event of the season, a glittering arena where reputations were made and broken. For Alistair, it was a battlefield. For Elara, it felt like the stage for a final act she couldn't yet comprehend. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis was a symphony of excess. Crystal chandeliers, weighing as much as cars, dripped light onto a sea of couture and custom-tailored suits. The air buzzed with the low hum of powerful conversations, the clinking of glasses filled with vintage Dom Perignon, and the delicate strains of a string quartet. This was Alistair Sterling's natural habitat, a room full of people to be either impressed, acquired, or dismissed. He navigated the crowd with the predatory grace of a shark, Elara, a beautiful, silent ship in his wake. He held her hand, but it was not a gesture of affection. It was an anchor, keeping her at his side. He introduced her with a possessive pride. My wife Elara, always placing a slight emphasis on the "my," as if her name were a subtitle to his own. For the first hour, Elara played her part. She smiled at ancient society dames dripping in family jewels, and nodded politely to hedge fund managers whose eyes seemed to calculate her worth. She spoke of the nursery, the due date, and her mild, socially acceptable cravings. She was the perfect, glowing, expectant mother. She was a lie. Inside, a storm was brewing. A wave of nausea more potent than any she'd experienced in her first trimester washed over her. The crush of the crowd, the overwhelming mix of perfumes, and the relentless pressure of Alistair's grip were making her feel faint. "Alistair," she whispered, leaning into him slightly. "I need to sit down. I'm not feeling well." In a minute, he hissed his smile, never faltering as he greeted a senator. "I see Croft over by the terrace. We're going in." He propelled her forward, his fingers digging into her arm. Julian Croft stood with a small group, a tall, distinguished man in his late 40s, with silvering temples and calm, intelligent eyes. He looked different from the other men in the room. While they vibrated with a frantic energy, a need to be seen, Croft possessed an unnerving stillness, a self-assuredness that came from a lineage of power, not a frantic climb to it. "Julian! Good to see you, Alistair," boomed his voice a little too loud. He clapped Croft on the shoulder, a gesture of forced familiarity that Croft absorbed without reaction. Alistair Croft said his voice, a smooth, low baritone. His eyes moved from Alistair to Elara, and for a fleeting moment his polite smile softened into something that looked like genuine concern. "Mrs. Sterling, you look radiant but a bit pale. Are you quite all right?" The simple, direct question was so unexpected that Elara was momentarily stunned. No one else had truly looked at her all night. "I'm just a little tired," she managed to say. "Nonsense, she's strong as an ox." Alistair laughed, squeezing her arm again. "Pregnancy agrees with her. Now, Julian, about that third-quarter projection for Omnicorp's logistics division." Alistair launched into his pitch, his voice a torrent of numbers and acronyms. He was selling performing desperate to impress. Elara felt herself swaying, the room tilting slightly. The nausea was rising a hot wave in her throat. She had to get out. "Alistair." "Please," she interrupted, her voice barely a whisper, but sharp with desperation. "I really need some air. Now." Alistair stopped mid-sentence. The other men in the circle went silent. All eyes were on them. Alistair's face, which had been a mask of jovial confidence, darkened. A vein pulsed in his temple. He saw her interruption not as a need, but as an act of insubordination. In front of Julian Croft, the man he needed to conquer. He turned to her, his body creating a small, tense pocket of privacy in the bustling room. His smile was gone, replaced by a tight, menacing line. "What did I tell you?" He breathed, his voice a venomous whisper, meant only for her. "Do not do this to me. Do not embarrass me here. I'm not trying to embarrass you," she pleaded, her hand going to her stomach as a dull ache started to bloom. "I feel like I'm going to be sick. I need to leave. We're not leaving." "I am closing this deal tonight," he seethed. "You will go to the powder room, splash some water on your face, and you will come back here and be the supportive wife I require you to be. Is that understood?" Tears of frustration and fear pricked her eyes. It wasn't the words, but the sheer contempt with which he said them. He saw her, her pain, her pregnancy as nothing more than an inconvenient variable in his spreadsheet of success. The protective fire she had felt earlier roared to life. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I am your wife, not your employee. And I am the mother of your child. I am not well, and I am going home, with or without you." She pulled her arm from his grasp. For a woman who had spent 3 years acquiescing, it was an act of seismic rebellion. Alistair's control snapped. It happened in a horrifying instant. The civility of the ballroom, the polite chatter, the music, it all seemed to warp and slow down. In his rage, he forgot where he was. He forgot the hundreds of eyes, the iPhones that were always recording. He saw only her defiance. As she turned to walk away, he reached out not to stop her, but to propel her. "You are not walking away from me," he snarled. He shoved her. It wasn't a gentle push. It was a hard, angry, two-handed shove to her shoulders. The force of it, combined with her heels on the polished marble floor and her slightly altered center of gravity, sent her stumbling backward. Her heel caught, and she went down. She fell in a heap of midnight blue silk. A gasp of pain escaping her lips as she instinctively curled around her stomach. For a single eternal second, the entire grand ballroom of the St. Regis went completely, utterly silent. The music stopped. The chatter died. The only sound was Elara's sharp, indrawn breath. Then a collective gasp swept through the room. Julian Croft was the first to move. He was by her side in 2 strides, his face a mask of cold fury directed at Alistair before it softened with concern for Elara. "Are you hurt? Don't move." Alistair stood, frozen, his hands still slightly outstretched, his face a grotesque picture of shock and disbelief at his own actions. He stared down at his wife on the floor, the glittering crowd now staring at him like he was a monster. The mask hadn't just shattered. It had been pulverized, and what lay beneath was uglier than anyone could have imagined. In that one silent moment, Alistair Sterling, the king of his universe, became a pariah. And he had no idea that this public humiliation was only the very beginning of a fall, so total, so absolute, it would erase him completely. The silence in the ballroom lasted only a few seconds, but for Alistair, it stretched into an eternity. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with judgment. He saw it all in a dizzying panorama. The shocked faces, the whispered condemnations, the glint of a dozen smartphone cameras held aloft their digital eyes, capturing his disgrace. A society blogger, a piranha named Chloe Vance, was already tapping furiously on her screen, a venomous smile on her face. Julian Croft knelt beside Elara, ignoring Alistair completely. "Elara, can you hear me?" "We're getting you out of here," he said, his voice a calm anchor in the chaos. He signaled to a hotel security guard who was already rushing over his face, grim. "I'm fine," Elara said, her voice shaky as she pushed herself up, refusing Croft's offered hand. She was rattled, bruised, but her eyes held a new, steely resolve. She looked at Alistair not with fear or sadness, but with a chilling finality. It was the look of a stranger. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the renewed quiet as Alistair took a step toward her. She pushed herself to her feet, her movements stiff. She smoothed down her dress, a gesture of composure that was more devastating to Alistair than any scream would have been. Without another word, she turned and walked away. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea, a silent, respectful corridor opening through the glittering elite. No one looked at Alistair. Their gazes were fixed on the lone, proud figure of his pregnant wife walking out of his life. As soon as she was gone, the spell broke. The murmuring erupted into a roar. Alistair felt 100 pairs of eyes on him, not with admiration, but with disgust. He was no longer a titan. He was a spectacle, a brute. "You're a disgrace, Sterling," Julian Croft said, his voice low and laced with contempt as he rose to his full height. He looked Alistair dead in the eye. "The deal is off. In fact, I'd suggest you check your company's stock price come morning." He turned on his heel and strode away, leaving Alistair standing alone in a circle of his own making. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through Alistair's rage-fueled shock. He had to fix this. He could fix anything. He pulled out his phone, his hands trembling, and dialed Elara. It went straight to voicemail. He dialed again. "Voicemail." He called his driver. "Where is she? Where did you take her?" He barked into the phone. "Mrs. Sterling. Took a taxi, sir." The driver replied, his voice professionally, neutral but with an undertone of disapproval. "She instructed me to wait for you." A taxi. His wife, pregnant and in a couture gown, had taken a yellow cab rather than ride in the same car as him. The humiliation was a physical blow. He stormed out of the ballroom, ignoring the stares and the whispers that followed him like a cloud of poison. Meanwhile, Elara sat in the back of the taxi, the city lights a blur through her tear-filled eyes. She didn't go back to the penthouse. That wasn't her home. It was his monument. She directed the driver to a brownstone in Greenwich Village, the home of her closest friend, Isabella Rossi. Isabella, a razor-sharp corporate lawyer who had never trusted Alistair, opened the door in her pajamas, her face instantly shifting from sleepy confusion to alarm. "Elara." "Oh my God, what happened? Are you okay?" "The baby." Elara collapsed into her friend's arms, the composure she had maintained in the ballroom finally crumbling. "He pushed me. Izzy," she sobbed. "In front of everyone, he shoved me to the ground." Isabella guided her inside her expression, hardening into a lawyerly fury. "Okay," she said, her voice firm. "Okay, we can handle this. First, we call your doctor. Right now. We get you checked out. Then you tell me everything. And then," she added, her eyes flashing, "we burn his whole world to the ground." Back at the St. Regis, Alistair paced the curb waiting for his car. His phone buzzed violently. It was a news alert from a gossip site. The headline was stark tech mogul Alistair Sterling assaults pregnant wife at Legacy Ball. Below it was a grainy 10-second video. It showed him shoving her. It showed her fall. It had already been viewed 50,000 times. A cold dread far deeper than any business loss settled in his gut. This wasn't a PR problem he could spin. This was a video, an undeniable, globally accessible record of his monstrosity. As his Bentley finally pulled up, he saw his reflection in the polished black paint. The perfect tuxedo. The handsome face, but for the first time, he saw the ugliness that lay beneath. He thought of his company, Aura Innovations, built on an image of sleek, futuristic perfection, an image he had just single-handedly destroyed. He still believed, however, that the damage was containable. He was Alistair Sterling. He had billions of dollars, an army of lawyers, and a network of powerful people. He could weather this storm. What he didn't know was that this wasn't a storm. It was a meticulously planned demolition. And the video of the shove wasn't the cause. It was just the detonator. Across town in his own penthouse, Julian Croft was on a conference call with a team of financial analysts in Zurich and Hong Kong. "The morality clause in his corporate financing has been triggered," Croft said, his voice cold as ice. "The reputational damage is catastrophic. The video is viral. Begin the short sell at market open. All of it. I want Aura Innovations to be a penny stock by noon." The world. Alistair Sterling woke up to the next morning was not his own. He had slept for 2 fitful hours on a sofa in his cavernous, empty home, expecting the fury of the night to have subsided into a manageable crisis. He was wrong. It had metastasized. His phone was a nuclear reactor of notifications, hundreds of missed calls, thousands of texts and emails. The video of the shove was everywhere. It was on every major news network, looped endlessly. The hashtag #Sterling shove was the #1 trend worldwide. Pundits, celebrities, and politicians were issuing statements of condemnation. Women's rights groups were picketing outside his office building. He turned on the financial news channel. The anchor, a woman he'd had dinner with 2 weeks ago, looked grimly into the camera. "And Aura Innovations is in absolute freefall. The stock, which closed yesterday at $350 a share, plummeted the second the opening bell rang. It's currently trading at under $90, and is still dropping triggered by a massive coordinated short-selling attack and the invocation of a reputational damage clause by its primary lenders. Alistair felt the blood drain from his face. The reputational damage clause. It was boilerplate, a standard part of the massive loans he'd taken out to fuel his aggressive expansion. It stipulated that if the CEO engaged in conduct that brought the company into public disrepute, the lenders could call in their loans immediately. He had signed it without a second thought. Who would ever be stupid enough to trigger it? His private line rang. It was Marcus Thorne, his CFO, a man known for his unflappable calm. Today he sounded like he was having a heart attack. "Alistair, it's a bloodbath, the Swiss consortium, the one backing the Omnicorp deal. They've pulled everything. They're calling in the $2 billion bridge loan. We have to pay it back in 48 hours. We don't have that kind of liquidity. The stock plunge has triggered a margin call on your personal shares, the ones you leveraged for the loan. Alistair, they're going to wipe you out." Alistair stumbled to his office window, looking down at the city that had once worshipped him. The reality was crashing down on him. The shove was not just a marital spat, it was the kill shot to his empire. The public outrage was providing the perfect cover for a sophisticated financial assault. This wasn't random. This was targeted. This was precise. "It's Croft." Alistair breathed the name, tasting like ash. "Julian Croft is behind this." "How? Why?" Marcus stammered. "He was there last night. He saw it all. He told me to check the stock price," Alistair said, his mind racing. "He's using the scandal to destroy me." Meanwhile, in Isabella Rossi's quiet apartment, Elara was sitting on the sofa, a cup of tea in her hands. She had been cleared by her doctor. The baby was fine, miraculously unharmed. But she was not. The emotional shock had settled into a grim, quiet anger. Isabella sat opposite her, her laptop open. "Okay, Elara, we need to talk strategy. He's going to try and control the narrative. He'll issue a statement about stress exhaustion, maybe even blame you. He will try to paint you as unstable. We need to get ahead of it." "I don't want a war, Izzy," Elara said wearily. "I just want to be free of him." "Being free of a man like Alistair isn't a passive act," Isabella countered, her gaze sharp. "He doesn't let things go. He conquers them. You need to protect yourself and your child. I've already spoken to the best divorce attorney in the state, Eleanor Vance, no relation amusingly enough. She's ready to file an emergency petition, citing domestic abuse, freezing all your shared assets until a settlement is reached." Elara looked down at her hands. The massive diamond engagement ring felt like a shackle. "Our assets, Izzy. I signed a prenup. Everyone told me it was ironclad. I get almost nothing." Isabella smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. "Prenups have clauses too, Elara. Infidelity clauses, abuse clauses. Alistair Sterling didn't just push you in a ballroom. In the eyes of the law, he committed an act of public assault. That ironclad prenup, it just melted." As they spoke, a delivery arrived for Elara. It was a simple manila envelope with no return address, dropped off by a private courier. Puzzled, she opened it. Inside was not a letter, but a small encrypted flash drive and a single slip of paper with a handwritten note. "I believe this belongs to you. It might help you understand who you were married to. J.C. Julian Croft." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. What was this? She looked at Isabella, who raised an eyebrow. "Well," Isabella said, leaning forward, "this just got interesting. Let's see what Mr. Croft wants us to find. They plugged the drive into Isabella's laptop. It contained a single, heavily protected file. Isabella, whose legal work often involved forensic data recovery, spent 20 minutes bypassing the security. Finally, the file opened. It wasn't financial data or corporate secrets. It was a collection of private emails between Alistair Sterling and the board of a small, now defunct tech startup from 5 years ago, a company called Helios. The emails detailed Alistair's initial offer to buy the company, which was rejected. Then a series of increasingly threatening messages, and finally, a string of correspondence between Alistair and a private investigator he had hired to dig up dirt on Helios's young founder. Elara's blood ran cold as she read the name of that founder, Daniel Croft. Julian Croft's younger brother. Daniel Croft. The name echoed in Elara's memory. Alistair had mentioned him once, years ago, in a rare, unguarded moment fueled by expensive whiskey. He'd spoken of a brilliant but naive competitor he had outmaneuvered early in his career. He'd painted it as a classic tale of business Darwinism, the strong and savvy devouring the weak and idealistic. The truth laid bare in the encrypted emails was infinitely more sinister. Helios, founded by the 24-year-old prodigy Daniel Croft, had developed a revolutionary data compression algorithm. It was the key to the seamless high-speed streaming that would later become the core technology of Aura Innovations. Alistair had wanted it. Daniel, an idealist who believed in open-source technology, had refused to sell to a man he considered a corporate predator. The emails chronicled Alistair's ruthless campaign to destroy him. He hadn't just outmaneuvered Daniel. He had systematically dismantled his life. The private investigator had unearthed a youthful indiscretion, a minor drug charge from Daniel's college days. Alistair had anonymously leaked it to investors, framing it as evidence of an unstable, unreliable character. He'd poached Helios's key engineers with exorbitant offers and suffocating non-disclosure agreements. He'd filed a dozen frivolous patent lawsuits to bleed the small startup dry of its legal funds. The final email in the chain was a forwarded news article. The headline read, "Troubled tech founder Daniel Croft dies by suicide." The date was just 3 days after Helios officially declared bankruptcy. Elara felt a wave of sickness, so profound it had nothing to do with her pregnancy. She looked at the screen at the cold, transactional words Alistair had written, and she finally understood. Her husband hadn't just built an empire. He had built it on the grave of another man. The foundational technology of Aura Innovations, the source of Alistair's billions, was stolen. Not through a clever legal loophole, but through a campaign of psychological warfare that had driven a young man to his death. "Oh my God, Izzy," she whispered, her hand covering her mouth. "Julian Croft, this isn't just about business for him. This is revenge. For his brother." Isabella read over her shoulder, her face grim. "This is more than revenge, Elara. This is biblical. Alistair didn't just ruin a competitor, he broke a family. And Julian has been waiting, biding his time for the perfect moment to strike." The shove at the Gala Elara realized wasn't the cause of Alistair's downfall. It was the pretext. Julian had likely been assembling his financial weapons for years, waiting for Alistair to make a single, public, indefensible mistake. He had given Alistair the rope, knowing that a man of his arrogance and temper would eventually hang himself with it. The flash drive wasn't just a gift. It was an explanation and an absolution. It was Julian telling her, "You are not collateral damage. You are a victim of the same man who destroyed my brother. I am not destroying your life. I am liberating you from his." A new strength, cold and clear, settled over Elara. This was no longer just about her. It was about justice for Daniel Croft. It was about ensuring that Alistair could never again use his power and wealth to crush someone else. Her hesitance vanished, replaced by a righteous fury. "Eleanor Vance," Elara said, her voice devoid of any tremor. "Call her now. Tell her we're not just filing for divorce. We're filing a civil suit. And I'm giving this flash drive to the SEC and the district attorney's office. Tell Alistair's lawyers that." Isabella's eyes widened. "Elara, that's thermonuclear." "He built a palace on top of a tomb," Elara said, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "My child will not bear the name of a man like that. I don't want his money. I want it all to turn to dust." Back at the Aura Innovations headquarters, Alistair was in his glass-walled office, which now felt like a fishbowl. His board of directors had convened an emergency meeting. He could see them through the glass, their faces stony. His phone rang. It was his lead attorney. "Alistair, I just got off the phone with a Ms. Eleanor Vance," the lawyer said, his voice strained. "It's bad. She's filing. She's citing the prenup's abuse clause. She's going for everything. But that's not the worst of it." "What could be worse?" Alistair scoffed, though a knot of fear was tightening in his chest. "They have evidence. Evidence of corporate malfeasance related to the founding of the company. Something about a startup called Helios. They're threatening to turn it over to the SEC." The world tilted on its axis. Helios. Elara knew about Helios. How could she possibly know? He had buried that so deep, erased every trace. Unless... The image of Julian Croft kneeling beside Elara, his expression of calm fury, flashed in his mind. It all clicked into place. The long game, the patient, meticulous revenge. Croft hadn't just waited for him to slip. He had armed his wife with the one weapon that could annihilate him completely. The door to his office opened. It was Marcus Thorne, his CFO. He wouldn't meet Alistair's eyes. "The board is ready for you, Alistair," he said quietly. "They've already voted." Alistair knew before he even walked into the room. He was walking to his own execution. The men and women he had hired, mentored, and made rich were now his judges. The empire of glass and steel he had constructed was about to shatter, and he was standing right at the epicenter. The boardroom was as cold and silent as a mausoleum. The 10 members of the board sat around the massive obsidian table, their faces grim. No one looked at Alistair as he entered. The chair at the head of the table, his chair, remained empty. He was directed to a smaller seat on the side, the place reserved for a visitor, a subordinate. The humiliation was exquisite. An elderly, imposing man named Richard Davies, the lead independent director, cleared his throat. "Alistair, we have convened this emergency session in light of 2 catastrophic events. The first, as you know, is the ongoing public relations disaster and the subsequent collapse of our market value. Our stock is now trading at $12 a share. We have lost over 90% of our value in less than 10 hours. Alistair started to speak, to defend, to explain, but Davies held up a hand, silencing him. "The second event," Davies continued, his voice heavy, "is a communication we received 1 hour ago from the legal representation of your wife, Elara Sterling. It contained allegations and, frankly, very compelling evidence of intellectual property theft, corporate sabotage, and fraud related to the founding technology of this company, specifically the assets of a company called Helios, founded by the late Daniel Croft." A few board members shifted uncomfortably. They knew the official sanitized version of the Helios acquisition. They did not know the truth. "This is a lie," Alistair blustered, his voice cracking. "A fabrication concocted by a bitter woman and my business rival." "Is it?" a new voice asked. It was Marcus Thorne, his CFO. He stood up, holding a tablet. "Alistair, I've been your CFO for 8 years. I've always admired your drive, but I can't be complicit in this." He tapped the tablet, and a document appeared on the large screen at the end of the room. "These are the original server logs from our R&D department dated from 6 years ago. Logs I was ordered to delete, but I kept a secure backup of just in case. They show the integration of the Helios algorithm into our system. The dates are 3 weeks before we legally acquired Helios's liquidated assets. The acquisition wasn't an acquisition. It was a cover-up for a theft that had already occurred. Betrayal, absolute and total, washed over Alistair. Marcus, his most loyal lieutenant, had just driven the final nail into his coffin. Davies nodded grimly. "Thank you, Marcus. In light of this and the overwhelming financial and legal jeopardy the company now faces, the board has taken a vote. Pursuant to Section 7B of your employment contract and the bylaws of this corporation, you are being removed as CEO and chairman of the board of Aura Innovations, effective immediately. You are to vacate the premises. Security will escort you." It was done. In the space of 5 minutes, he had been stripped of his title, his power, his creation. He was nothing. "You can't do this," he whispered, looking from face to face. These were people whose children's tuitions he paid, whose mortgages were funded by his genius. They wouldn't even meet his gaze. "I built this. This company is me. No, Alistair." Richard Davies said, his voice laced with pity. "This company is a publicly traded entity with a fiduciary duty to its shareholders. A duty you have catastrophically failed. Please, leave with what little dignity you have left." 2 security guards, men he recognized, entered the room. They stood on either side of him, their expressions impassive. The walk from the boardroom to the elevator was the longest of his life. Employees peered out of their offices, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. The king was being frog-marched out of his own castle. As he reached the lobby, he saw a crowd of reporters and news cameras held back by a security line. Their questions rained down on him like blows. "Sterling, is it true you've been fired? Do you have a comment on the SEC investigation? Alistair, what do you have to say to your wife?" He pushed through them, his face a stony mask, and stumbled out onto the street. He instinctively reached for his phone to call his driver, then remembered the Bentley was a corporate asset. He no longer had a driver. He began to walk aimlessly. His phone buzzed again. A new alert. His brokerage firm. "Margin, call your assets, have been liquidated to cover your debt." The billions of dollars in stock he'd held, the foundation of his entire net worth, had been leveraged against the loans. When the stock price collapsed, its value was no longer enough to cover the debt. The bank had sold it all for pennies on the dollar to pay back the lenders. It was all gone. The stock, the company, the power. He eventually found himself standing in front of the soaring glass tower that bore his name. He looked up at it, at the word Sterling, emblazoned in 10-foot-high letters at the top. A crew of workers was already assembling on a scaffold, preparing to take them down. He finally made it back to the penthouse late that night. The doorman, who usually greeted him with a deferential, "Good evening, Mr. Sterling," simply nodded and looked away. The apartment was dark and silent. The expensive curated silence felt different now. It was no longer peaceful. It was empty. He walked through the vast museum-like rooms, his footsteps echoing. He saw the spaces Elara had tried to soften, a vase of flowers here, a stack of art books there. Small rebellions against his sterile aesthetic that he had barely noticed. He walked into their bedroom. Half the closet was empty. Her clothes, her shoes, her life all gone. All that remained was the Serafina azure gown from the night before, lying in a heap on the velvet chaise where it had been laid out with such promise. He picked it up. The midnight blue silk was soft in his hands. It smelled faintly of her perfume. He sank onto the chaise, the dress clutched in his fist, and for the first time since he was a child, Alistair Sterling began to cry. They were not tears of remorse or sadness for Elara. They were tears of pure, desolate self-pity. He had lost everything. He had been erased, and in the crushing emptiness of his perfect gilded cage, he was utterly and completely alone. 4 months later, the world had spun on. The blistering heat of summer had given way to a crisp autumn that painted the city in hues of gold and amber. The name Alistair Sterling, once a fixture of financial news and society pages, had faded into a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties, a ghost of the Gilded Age. For Elara, this new season was a literal and metaphorical rebirth. Her mornings no longer began with the automated hum of blackout shades, retracting in a sterile penthouse overlooking a city she felt no connection to. They began in a cozy one-bedroom apartment in Greenwich Village, with the warm, slanted light of the sun filtering through the leaves of an oak tree outside her window. The silence here wasn't the oppressive, curated emptiness of Alistair's world. It was a peaceful silence, filled with the gentle ticking of an antique clock on the mantel and the distant, reassuring sounds of a neighborhood waking up. This morning, she sat in a comfortable armchair, a steaming mug of chamomile tea warming her hands. Her pregnancy was a beautiful, commanding presence, now a constant reminder of the life she had fought to protect. She felt a soft, rolling flutter from within, and smiled, placing a hand on the firm curve of her belly. "Good morning, little one," she whispered. There was no nutritionist monitoring her breakfast, no prenatal guru dictating her stretches. There was just her and her child in a world of their own making. After a simple breakfast, she walked the 10 blocks to Soho. The walk itself was a newfound liberty. She'd once been ferried everywhere in the blacked-out silence of a Bentley, watching the world through tinted glass. Now she was in it. She felt the brisk air on her cheeks, smiled at a dog walker, and bought a warm croissant from a street vendor, savoring the simple, anonymous pleasure of it all. Her destination was a storefront on Green Street. The large front window, still smudged with painter's dust, bore simple, elegant gold lettering, Vance Gallery. Not Sterling. Vance. It was her mother's maiden name, a name that felt solid and real, a name she was reclaiming from the shadow of the one she had shed. Inside the gallery was her sanctuary in progress. The air smelled of fresh paint and sawdust. Sunlight poured through the large window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, hopeful sprites. The walls were a stark, clean white, a blank canvas for her future. She ran a hand along the cool, smooth surface. She had spent the last 3 years as a decoration on someone else's wall. Now she would be the one to choose what was worthy of being seen. The divorce had been finalized with a brutal efficiency that surprised everyone but Isabella. Faced with the irrefutable evidence from the Helios flash drive, which had sparked a massive SEC investigation and multiple shareholder lawsuits, Alistair's high-priced lawyers had advised him to avoid a courtroom at all costs. Eleanor Vance, Elara's formidable attorney, had initially drawn up a settlement that would have given her a significant portion of Alistair's remaining and rapidly dwindling wuchu. But Elara had refused. She didn't want his blood money. She didn't want a life funded by the destruction of Daniel Croft and the hubris of the man she'd married. Instead, she had taken a modest one-time settlement. It was enough to secure this gallery, to buy her small apartment, and to create a trust for her child. It was the money of a clean break, a severance package from a toxic life. It was a declaration that she was not a victim seeking reparations, but a survivor building anew. Don't you ever get tired of just staring at empty walls? Isabella's voice broke her reverie. She stood in the doorway holding 2 large paper cups. She looked around the space, a proud smile on her face. Okay, I admit it. It's starting to look like a real place. The contractors said the new track lighting will be installed by Friday. Terrified, Elara laughed, taking the offered cup of decaf coffee. It's a good terrified, the kind that reminds you're alive. Her first exhibition was already planned. Titled Rebirth, it would feature the work of 3 brilliant but overlooked female artists she'd admired for years. It was everything her old life wasn't: authentic, collaborative, and built to elevate others, not just herself. Any news on the legal front? Elara asked, her voice casual. She no longer asked with anxiety, but with the detached curiosity of someone reading about a distant historical event. Just that the shareholder class action is moving forward. They're picking the bones of what's left of his estate clean, Isabella said, taking a sip of her latte. Aura Innovations was bought for pennies on the dollar by a competitor. They're rebranding the whole thing. The name Sterling will be wiped from the tech world completely. And Julian Croft sent a rather large anonymous donation to a suicide prevention charity in his brother's name. A quiet final victory for him, I suppose. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 friends watching a dream take shape. Then the bright sunlight streaming through the front door was abruptly blocked. A shadow fell across the dusty floor. A man stood, silhouetted in the entrance, hesitant, as if uncertain he was allowed to cross the threshold. Elara's breath caught. Even diminished, the shape was unmistakable. Her heart didn't pound with fear, as it once might have. Instead, a profound stillness settled over her, a cold, clear wave of memory, followed by an immediate, steely resolve. She would not be afraid of him anymore. He took a shuffling step inside. The man who had once commanded ballrooms and boardrooms with his sheer presence now seemed to shrink under the high ceilings of the empty gallery. He was thin, disturbingly so. The custom-tailored suit he wore, likely one of the last vestiges of his old life, hung on his gaunt frame like a costume on a scarecrow. His face was sallow. His eyes, once sharp and predatory, were now hollow and constantly shifting, unable to land on anything for more than a second. It was the face of a man who had been comprehensively broken. It was Alistair. Isabella moved instantly, placing herself between him and Elara, a protective shield of legal fury. "You have no right to be here. Leave now, or I'll call the police," she said, her voice like ice. "Please," Alistair rasped. The voice that had once boomed with authority was now a thin, reedy thing. He wasn't looking at Isabella. His haunted gaze was fixed on Elara. "Elara, can I have a word? 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." Elara looked at the ghost before her. She saw the desperation, the ruin. She felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a detached, clinical sadness for the sheer waste of a life. She gave Isabella a small, reassuring nod. Isabella reluctantly stepped aside. Her arms crossed her eyes, never leaving him. "What do you want, Alistair?" Elara asked. Her voice was calm and even, carrying easily through the quiet space. It was the voice of a woman in full possession of herself. I wanted to say I'm sorry." He stammered the word, sounding foreign and clumsy on his tongue. He took another shuffling step forward. "For that night. For everything. I see it now. I was a fool. I was obsessed with the deal, with winning. I lost sight of what mattered." Elara listened intently, not to the words, but to the meaning behind them. It was a speech she realized that he had likely rehearsed 100 times in the lonely silence of whatever diminished world he now inhabited. It was an apology centered entirely around himself. "I was a fool. I was obsessed. I lost sight." "What do you think mattered, Alistair?" She asked her question simple and direct. He seemed thrown. "You," he said, too quickly. "You mattered. The baby. Our life." A small, sad smile touched Elara's lips. "Do you know what I think about when I remember that night? It's not the fall. It's not even the shove. It's the moment before. The look in your eyes when I told you I felt sick. You didn't see me. You didn't see your wife or the mother of your child. You saw an inconvenient variable that was threatening your transaction with Julian Croft. You saw an obstacle, a glitch in your plan. That is the truth of that moment. You can't apologize for that, Alistair, because it's not what you did. It's who you are." He flinched, the truth of her words a physical blow. "That's not... I can change," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "People can change. Don't you see I've lost everything? I have nothing left." His self-pity was a bottomless ocean, and in that moment, Elara understood him with a clarity that was both chilling and liberating. He wasn't mourning her or the life they could have had. He was mourning the reflection of himself that she and his wealth had provided. He mourned the power, the adulation, the fear he inspired. He had come here seeking not her forgiveness, but some form of validation that the great Alistair Sterling still existed even as a penitent. She placed a hand on her stomach, where she felt the gentle, persistent flutter of her child's life. A life that was real and pure and untainted by his legacy. "That's where you're wrong," she said, her voice soft but unshakable. "You lost your things, your money, your company, your name on a building. They were never truly yours to begin with. They were just built on the ruin of Daniel Croft's life. You've lost symbols of power. I, on the other hand, am about to gain everything that truly matters." She looked past him through the large window at the bright, bustling Soho street. She was no longer an object in a penthouse, a Sterling accessory. She was here in the heart of the city, surrounded by life and art and possibility, about to bring a new life into the world, a life that would know only love and truth. "Goodbye, Alistair," she said. The finality in her voice was absolute. There was no anger, no hatred. There was simply nothing. She had written the final word of their story, and the book was now closed. With that, she turned her back on him. She walked towards Isabella, towards the clean white walls and the promise of the future they held. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Alistair stood there for another minute, a relic from a forgotten past in a place he did not belong. He was an echo in a room that was now filled with a vibrant, forward-looking silence. Finally, he turned and shuffled away, swallowed by the anonymous New York crowd, a man who had once owned the world, and now didn't even own a place in his wife's memory. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a rich man's downfall. It was the story of a woman's rise. Elara Sterling's journey reminds us that true wealth isn't measured in stock prices or square footage, but in courage, integrity, and the freedom to be yourself. She escaped the gilded cage not by destroying her tormentor, but by building a new life on her own terms, a life of meaning and purpose for herself and her child. Her story is a powerful testament to the fact that even in the darkest moments, we have the strength to reclaim our own narrative. If this story of justice and rebirth resonated with you, please show your support by giving this video a thumbs up and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And for more true-life dramas that explore the complexities of the human heart, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. What did you think of Alistair's ultimate fate? Was it justice? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.